Stacey and I went along to a panel discussion at the Cornish Museum of Life in Helston, where we are currently holding our I Was, I Am, I Will Be exhibition. And the panel was made up of a number of professionals from different fields of health and wellbeing. There was opportunities for audience members to ask a question, and one of the questions that were written down and handed to the panel before they started was, how do we handle social anxiety in the workplace? And there were a couple of things that really struck us. So firstly, Lawrence Reed, who was chairing the panel, directed the question at one of the members, and he didn't seem to know what social anxiety is or how it would affect you in the workplace. And even after Ellen Wilkinson explained what social anxiety was, the conversation turned very much to general mental health, work-life balance, and there were a few panel members that just didn't seem to be able to demonstrate that they understood social anxiety very well. The key takeaway from the discussion was that people who are experiencing social anxiety need to go and have a conversation with their employers, and then the employer can make reasonable adjustments to their working environment. There are a couple of problems with this. So when we are feeling socially anxious, quite often we think there's something really deeply wrong with us, and I always thought I was defective in some way. We look around and we think, well, other people can do these things and I should be able to do it. And it's that I should be able to that really stops us from speaking out, because we really do think there's something wrong with us, and we don't want to draw attention to that fact, and we don't want to risk losing our jobs if we're seen as incompetent, and that would be the big story that we would make up that could happen. And one of the challenges that we face is that a lot of people who haven't experienced social anxiety, they really struggle to understand how you can be afraid of these things. Even people who have anxieties about other things don't always find it easy to understand the concept of social anxiety. Let's look at some of the situations in which we might be affected in the workplace. So I know Stacey's already shared a brilliant personal example of how social anxiety has affected her in her workplace and ultimately led to her leaving her job. For me, I've had trouble with answering the phone, particularly answering the phone in front of people. When you walk into a building to find a seat and you don't have a designated desk and there's lots of different groups working together, so you end up sitting somewhere random with people you don't know. Making plans for lunch. So are you gonna go and sit on your own and feel anxious? Are you gonna go and try and talk to someone and feel anxious? You might just choose to go for a walk, or just avoid that uncomfortable situation around lunchtime anyway, where you are sort of forced to be social. So presentations are a big thing, particularly in the job interview. I've done a lot of job interviews that have required a presentation. And that's not something I'm absolutely amazing at, to be honest. There can be issues with relationships between colleagues. The way that quiet can often be misunderstood and misinterpreted as being rude or being lazy. I had a situation where I had a colleague who, she really didn't like me, and I dealt with that by avoiding her as much as possible. But she was the senior person and she was assuming that I wasn't doing any work, and because she couldn't see what I was doing, I was a healthcare assistant at the time. She obviously was making up stories about what I was doing, and she didn't know that I was actually really good at my job, because we'd only just started working with each other, and she didn't know that I could be trusted. And I didn't help that by avoiding and keeping away from her and not having conversations with her, because I felt really intimidated by her. And in the end, it exploded into something that was truly awful, and she was shouting at me in front of patients, and I was breaking down and crying and, you know, not making a lot of sense, and then eventually just didn't work together at all. And that wasn't my finest hour. It wasn't resolved very well. And I didn't feel like I could go and talk about what was happening with any of my colleagues. Yeah, so I think that's quite an extreme example, but there are situations where quietness, social anxiety, shyness, it can be misinterpreted, and people can make up stories, because that's what humans do. We fill in the blanks with our own narrative, and we make up stories about what's going on for that person, and we can assume that people don't like us when that's not even the case. So yeah, there can be a lot of issues with relationships with colleagues. There was a time when I was in a meeting with my employer and my colleague, and we had a guest visiting us, and the guest was there to talk about marketing, and, you know, our jobs were really on the line at this point because the business wasn't doing very well. And my colleague and my employer were really good at waffling. They were going off tangent, and I was getting increasingly frustrated that we only had an hour with this person, and we didn't seem to be getting anywhere. And eventually I was like, I've got to say something. I'm gonna have to. And eventually I just blurted out, can we just keep this on track? And it came out as far more loudly and assertive than I had ever anticipated. And 6 weeks down the road, my employer sent me an email saying, do not berate me in front of guests, and these are a list of other things that I don't like about you as well. From his office upstairs, so I'm assuming he had some social anxiety challenges himself as well. So there's another one. If you can't actually have a conversation about challenges and take feedback or give feedback or get curious about what's going on, which when we are feeling socially anxious we don't tend to do because we are going into protective mode. And I wrote about this quite a bit in our recent blog post on loneliness. So I'm going to leave that there, and yeah, those were the two issues that really struck me. The first one being that some people aren't really understanding of social anxiety and the implications, and the second thing being that actually having a conversation with your employer, it probably is necessary, but how to go about that, getting the courage to do that, is something that needs to be looked into a bit more. And creating the awareness around employers so that they really do understand social anxiety by the time you are ready to have that conversation with them. We did a really interesting workshop with the student liaison officers at Cornwall College, and we had them walk through the experience of a student who was feeling socially anxious, and identify things about their environment, about their approach, that they could change because they now understood it, and all of them in some way could connect to that feeling of anxiety and how that might play out in the social situations. And a lot of them had actually had those experiences themselves. 1 in 10 of us have experienced social anxiety, and over 40% of us consider ourselves shy. So there's a lot of people out there who do totally get it. It's just a little bit scary when you're not sure who those people are, and if your employer is going to be accepting or if they are going to be critical and more concerned about your performance than supporting you. So we'll follow this up with a blog post to give you a little bit more information, and yeah, We'll speak to you soon.